So one question I get asked a lot, and something that is spoken about a disproportionate amount online, is morning routines. What is my morning routine? So on and so forth. As you might have gleaned from this series so far, no, I don't think about doing cold dips, cold plunges, all this sort of stuff. Now, that might be an inflammatory statement to some who have found that cold dips, all that sort of good stuff in the morning is influential in their levels of productivity. But understand that your morning routine, whatever it is that you have crafted, is nothing more than a preference. You should not need to do that. The best way to formulate and create your own morning routine is simply start with the end in mind and reverse engineer as to what it is you're actually trying to achieve. For me, there are clearly defined outcomes as a professional and as an athlete. So what do I need to do in the morning that's conducive to cultivating that state? So this morning, no real training session or just mobility, but I do know that movement, I know that daylight, I know that hydration, and I know that caffeine all contribute to secretions of dopamine and epinephrine, which is going to increase my ability to focus, to get into flow state, so on and so forth. So 3 or 4 activities in the morning that cultivate that is all that I need to be doing. And anything more, from my perspective, is a distraction, it's procrastination, it's fluffing around in an effort to feel productive, and we're actually avoiding the elephant in the room, which is getting stuff done. So, although some people want to talk enormously to the importance of a morning routine, understand that it is only a fucking preference. You do not need it. If you do really need it, then ultimately there's a work capacity issue there. And when you're cultivating your morning routine, reverse engineer from what it is you actually want to achieve.
So, we'd just been to the doctor's clinic. And I sourced that privately. I think it's called London GP Group, London Clinic Group, something like that. What I want to say is the doctor I dealt with today was excellent. The process in itself is fucking abysmal in terms of they sell you a product, not cheap, 165 quid for a consult appointment to go and get your ECG taken, have a medical exam, have your blood pressure, so on and so forth. Turn up and the doctor was like, I have absolutely no idea what you expect of me. I haven't been given any information. What even the fuck is the marathon des Sables? I was like, okay, there's a huge breakdown here. That being said, I had a great chat on a personal level with the doctor. He's like, okay, I understand, I know what it is you require from me. Ultimately, I can't actualise a lot of that without the relevant forms, but what I can do is just a general medical assessment I would do on an individual that's going to participate in this level of stressful endeavour. So we did blood pressure, like twice seated, twice standing. I think my average was 134/74, which I'm led to believe is pretty textbook. Happy enough with that. Resting pulse rate in there after a couple of coffees and stuff was 49, so again, happy with that. Got the old stethoscope on me, and he leads me to believe that everything should be good. Ultimately, the reason I went at this point in the process is I wanted the warm and fuzzy of knowing, right, my ECG checks out, there's no issues, no dramas that could lead to me being turned away on the day of the race. Wasn't able to get that, but it's not the end of the world. I guess everyone's in the same boat with that. So we will wait to acquire the necessary forms from the governing body of the MDS, go back 4 weeks prior to the event, get it tested, fingers crossed everything's fucking as it should be, and then it's a bit of a warm and fuzzy that the event can proceed accordingly.
So, as promised on the Instagram stories, we're now going to do a question and answer session, which I found to be really amusing based on some of the questions that came through. I thought were fucking brilliant. So we're going to rattle through them. Some are going to require a girthier response. Others are going to be pretty shot from the hip. So let's get stuck straight into them. If you had time for just one, martial arts or climbing, which would you do? Given that I'm built like a fucking big toe and I don't really like heights, that's a pretty easy answer for me. Second question. What pack do you use when running with weight? I have covered this probably 50 times, including in previous YouTube videos. It is a Raid Light. Have a look on the videos to unearth more on that. How many kilometers do you run per week at the moment? I'm assuming you're European by asking in kilometers. In miles, it averages around about 45. Upper limit in the minute is about 55, which is probably in the region of 75 to 85 kilometers per week. Next question. How do you think Olympic lifting fits in with endurance running? That's an enormously multifaceted question. Ultimately, there is always more than one way to skin a cat, and whilst I absolutely believe there are athletic attributes that can be gleaned from Olympic lifting, you ultimately have to ask the question, what is the end goal? If this guy wants to be, a really prolific runner and a very successful runner, does he have the time and energy within his week to allocate to learning the fundamentals of the Olympic lifts and all their derivations? And is he doing the relevant and subsequent mobility to allow him to access even the dorsiflexion to get into his positions? If the answer is yes, then go for it. But ultimately, I'm of the belief that you can achieve a lot of those attributes by use of plyometrics. And that's not a very popular opinion if you subscribe to the UKSCA school of thought, but in my opinion, it's the fucking truth. Olympic lifts look great for Instagram. If you're into CrossFit, all that sort of good shit, yeah, mega. If you're looking for actual transferability to elite endurance running, I don't really think there's an argument for the amount of time you have to allocate to it. Next question. I watched a YouTube video on food. What is the bare basics? What's the essentials? Pretty much everything I covered in that. I really covered in some depth the fact that I don't buy into the necessity for flamboyant foods Monday to Friday. It's really very functional. So for me, my base carbohydrate is always rice-based and derivations of that. Protein sources are pretty much chicken, salmon, and like a beef protein. And fruit and veggies, and that's you good to go. Next. Any recommendations for IT band syndrome? Yes, IT band syndrome is indicative that either, well, first principle, something is unhappy, which is causing a disproportionate amount of friction on the IT band. The iliotibial band needs to be tight. It is designed to be tight, but if it's too tight, that's what's causing problems. Ultimately, it tends to make itself known at either the hip or knee. Based on whether it's becoming known at hip and knee, you can then begin to reverse engineer questions from that, but it's always down to faulty biomechanics that have then been overloaded with either too much intensity or, more often than not, too much volume for a system that cannot currently handle that level of volume. So look at movement mechanics and then earn the right to volume. Next question. When rucking, which is American translation for tabbing or carrying weight, what do you use to weigh down your pack, and what's a good pack you could recommend? Same question about pack. Welcome to my world. In terms of weighing myself down, I'm not a believer in using dead weight, because if for whatever reason you have to ditch it, you're basically going to have to kiss goodbye to whatever object you were using to weigh you down. If, however, you use water, take the lid off, pull the cunt out, flatten it, compress it, and you've not lost anything. So I use water, and I heavily recommend you use water or sand to weigh yourself down. In terms of the day sack, again, Radiolite 24. If I'm just going out for like a midweek run and I'm just using a weighted day sack, I've got a Berghaus Monroe, really reliable bit of kit, and I just bang that on. That stays packed by the front door at all times, filled out with like fucking towels, blankets, and a pillow, and then a couple of big bottles of water in there with the lid taped shut, and you're good to go. I'm going to spend a little bit more time with this one. Great question. Do you ever feel lonely? First thing I'll do is help you understand there is a difference between being alone and being lonely, owing to the nature of what it is that I do and the way I've architected my life that creates enough space for real thought and strategic output. I'm alone a lot of the time. That's relatively solitary. That being said, I place more priority on the quality of time spent around people than the quantity. Too much time around people, I tend to feel a little bit claustrophobic and like I want to retract in a way. So no, I don't ever really feel lonely because I've cultivated my mind to be my own best friend. And if you're listening to this and the immediate knee-jerk reaction is that sounds really fucking sad, to that I would say, well, what are you avoiding? What are you escaping from when you're always needing to be surrounded by people or doing other things? A really commonly asked question is, how do you find people of a like-minded interest, so on and so forth? Well, the honest answer to that is if you aspire to be in a room surrounded by people who inspire you, what are you doing to credit and quantify yourself to be in that room? Because everyone would aspire to be in a room with high performers, billionaires, world champion athletes. But unless you're working on yourself to add valuable contributions to that level of conversation, then why would they want you in there? So utilizing time on your own, spent on self-development, personal mastery, self-awareness and emotional regulation, thinking about how you organically see the world, learning to articulate your thoughts and communicate effectively, to me, that's enormously enjoyable. And it's part of the mission of the Hard to Kill. It's part of my personal mission statement. So I am often alone and relatively solitary, but I never feel lonely. Sorry. Next question. What's the coolest thing about driving a Land Rover? Normally the driver in terms of temperature. They're not the fucking warmest things. They're definitely the most comfortable things. You do stand out, like you wouldn't have done 10 years ago because they no longer make them in the UK. If you're driving them around, typically you do stand out. But I've got to be honest, if you are thinking of buying one because you think you'd be a fucking chick magnet, that is not factual. All you will attract, the only attention that will now be on you is from middle-aged, overweight, greasy-fingered dudes who appreciate the mechanisms behind a Land Rover. That's the reality of it. Next question here is, how would you avoid knee pain with your training load? Any specific strength workout? There is no one workout that fixes anything, okay? Understand a workout is just a collective compilation of different stresses on the body that are going to elicit an appropriate response. So if you are a runner or you're doing a lot of running, then the core components within your sessions need to be looking at fortifying the structures and mechanisms in your body that are going to come under duress during your training. The whole principle with strength and conditioning, and this is something that, if I'm really honest, fucking grips my shit. The whole principle of strength and conditioning is not to do more of the same movement pattern and make it more robust. That's not how the human body works. It's not how physiology works. It is to develop traits and attributes and strengths that are not possible to be developed in sport-specific training. So doing more running specific stuff in a strength and conditioning session is actually counterintuitive because it adds more volume. Now, there's a certain time in the continuum when like plyometrics, like pogo hops, so on and so forth, are advantageous because they build tendon stiffness and they reduce chances of injury, so on and so forth. But if you're already running 50 miles per week, the amount of ground contacts you're accumulating is enormous. So if you then add in something like pogo hops, you're going to probably, most likely, in almost all cases, break the system. So we're looking at, well, how can we apply just enough strain to the tissues that would balance out unhelpful load distribution around the knees, around the ankles, around the hips, so on and so forth. So you're going to want to look at, the anterior tibialis, which doesn't get trained a lot by most people. You're going to want to look at the smaller tissues surrounding the lumbopelvic hip complex, glute med being a fantastic example of that, the vastus medialis oblique, the VMO being another great example of that. You want to be looking for movements that specifically isolate them and train them in isolation, but also put them into an integrative system where everything is working to its greatest extent. Okay, next question. For a person who only lifts weights and wants to start jiu-jitsu, is jiu-jitsu going to lead to muscle and strength gain loss? Mostly no. This is a relatively old belief system now, probably at least 20 years old that I'm aware of, that if you are training for an endurance capability, you're going to inhibit or interfere with your body's ability to accrue tissue. Looking at me, still being built exactly the same as I was at the beginning of this preparation, despite now running 55 miles per week, and I have not lost a pound on the scales, should say to you that actually, if you're periodizing this, if you're programming, and if you're recovering appropriately and doing all the nutritional interventions, you are not going to lose tissue per se. That being said, Jiu-Jitsu is not a typical endurance sport. It is very, very high intensity, and therefore it does create a stress on the central nervous system. So you may want to look at how much volume you're attributing to your strength work, because if you're looking at really top end strength, you might see a diminishing output on that. But again, it's a simple case of zooming out and understanding the process, and then again periodizing it. So if you know your training volume's high for Jiu-Jitsu, you want to make sure your training volume's quite low, but your intensity is high in your lifting, and vice versa. And if you do that effectively and appropriately, you should be getting, remove the word should, but you can elicit strength gains, hypertrophy gains, and improvements in Jiu-Jitsu concurrently. That is very much possible. What are your biggest business lessons? First lesson of business, and I got this from the Michael Scott School of Business. I'm joking, I didn't really. The first thing you need to know about business is it will kick the living fuck out of you. And if you perceive that it won't, then you are either willfully ignorant or very, very naive, and you're about to be taught a very, very hard lesson. I say that in the greatest possible respect to the person asking the question, because if you ultimately understand what your mission is or your just cause is, and you reverse engineered from that, and you have something like a strategy and something like a transformational purpose, that belief should be strong enough, or ought to be strong enough, that you will be pulled through all of the tactical challenges and difficulties that you're going to be faced with on the way. And that spans an enormous chasm of difficulties, from personnel difficulties through to like VAT, through to tax, through to logistical, technical. There are so many things that are going to come out of fucking left field and right field and hit you seemingly unexpectedly. So you have to understand what it is you're doing and really believe in why it's important for you to do that. That being said, I truly believe, like bar none, there is no greater journey of self-exploration, self-mastery than starting a business and taking it to where you aspire it to be. Truly, you will learn so much about your propensity to deal with stress. You will learn so much about what you inherently aspire to do when you face real challenge and real difficulty. And, it's quite easy for people to point and say, oh, it's easy for you, so on and so forth. Actually, when you're facing this magnitude of challenge and this real level of frustration, you're very quickly you're going to be taught what your belief systems actually have in store for you. Are you the kind of person who can inherently lean into that real uncertainty and challenge, or are you the kind of person who retracts? And you'll see a great many people who start businesses who ultimately just are not in the right frame of mind or haven't done the intrinsic internal work or visionary work to facilitate success there. Now, that's not to say that I'm in any way special or that I am fucking Elon Musk at all. Most people, if not everyone you're looking at in business, is fucking winging it. They've got a vision, they kind of know what they want to achieve, and they're committed to doing it, and they're learning on the job. And that is true for everyone. If you listen to my podcast with Stas from Through Dark, he said the exact same. Everyone's fucking winging it. We're all doing the best that we can. And if you look at companies like Amazon, they still make fuck ups despite being a multi-billion-dollar company. So if they can fuck up, then you can fuck up. Don't fear inefficiency. Don't fear things going wrong, wasting time and money, because you're going to do all those things. Those are an absolute certainty and par for the course. Just know what you're doing, know why it's important, understand you're going to take a few fucking punches, but you're going to learn a hell of a lot on the way. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. What are the qualities of a leader and what does it take? So I'm not going to be as self-indulgent as talk about why I think I'm a good leader, because I don't know. You're best off asking my team and my clients if I'm a good leader. What I know to be true is the people that I have basically aligned myself with to take leadership from, what I've really respected and admired about those is authenticity, i.e., they are able to be totally honest. They hold nothing back. They are absolutely vulnerable. That doesn't mean they overshare and talk about, fucking how their shit was this morning, but they're able to talk about what they found difficult and what they were then able to do to overcome that. So I believe authenticity is a trait that I enormously respect and admire, and I hope comes through me and how I aspire to lead and how I aspire to offer leadership to people. So there's that. Secondly, is ability to articulate and communicate oneself, because the biggest issue with communication is the illusion it's taken place. And someone who gets frustrated at themselves and then takes on people around them is inefficient leadership. People who are not authentic and don't have the courage to communicate, okay, I haven't actually done this before, this is new to me as well as it is for you, but let's try and figure it out. That's an issue. So I guess the ability to be authentic and then to communicate effectively with the people around you, knowing that non-verbally they're probably communicating it anyway, but having the confidence and the self-security to look into themselves and then communicate really what they're feeling in that moment, and really allow the person they're working with or alongside or above to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel encouraged. Because ultimately, all that we're aspiring to do as leaders is get people to give up their discretionary effort. So, there's minimal viable effort, which is what most people go through their life giving, and then there's people that go the extra mile and really give everything they've got. So in that discrepancy is what we refer to as discretionary effort. And if you make a person feel heard, feel seen, feel validated, feel safe, feel confident, appreciated, affiliated, all that sort of stuff, based on how you speak to them, how you inspire them, how you talk about the vision and what role they play in it, they are going to go above and beyond for you. Not for you, but for the mission. So you are going to get people who are there, who are committed, who want to go the extra mile, and then it's your role to step the fuck out of the way and understand you are actually there to serve them. You are there to help them, to expedite their process, their growth, and their journey, and that is it, no more. It's not about taking cream. Next question, do you have any push-pull legs plans that also have a bit of a running element to it? To that, I would actually transcend and look at the psychological. That indicates to me that there is an emotional attachment to doing push-pull legs, because you potentially perceive it elicits magical gains from a hypertrophy or a strength perspective, which I would say is not accurate. So what I would say to you as a coach is I would actually demonstrate a little bit of Socratic questioning and saying, well, what's the actual goal here? Because what if I could get you that goal quicker, more effectively, and with less pain and fatigue, but it didn't involve push-pull legs? So if you just want to do push-pull legs and run, crack on and do push-pull legs and run. Are you asking for information or confirmation? Because you can literally just go and do that. If you were going to be coached by me, I would ask you, well, what is the actual end goal? And we can reverse engineer from that, and it might not work around that. In fact, almost all cases I can say it wouldn't revolve around push-pull legs, because I'm not going to say it's lazy programming, but if there is a specific goal, I can probably think of numerous different ways in which we could expedite that process without having to use push-pull legs. Because if you're doing predominantly an entire leg-based day, good luck fucking running for the next 2 days. That's probably what I would say to that. What type of diet do you typically follow most often? I don't really know if it has a type or a name. In fact, probably the response to that question would be, if the diet has a name, run away. It's just good nutrition. Next question from Terry. Most vital gym equipment when opening a private studio on a budget for PT and group classes. Well, if you're going to be doing group classes, then you need to look at, well, what can be set up with minimal intervention and can be utilized quickly in a group environment. So for that, you pretty much can sit down and think about what it is you aspire to achieve. Also, is it group? Is it a group fighting? Sorry, is it a group of conditioning for fighters? Is it a group of yummy mummies? Is it a group of overweight elderly ladies? Like, who is it you're specifically catering to there? Because again, that will allow you to reverse engineer. There's zero point in getting an all singing, all dancing fucking £4,000 Watson rack that's got like every single safety feature going if you're going to be training people who also frequent Zumba classes. So think about what it is you actually want to elicit for them and reverse engineer from that. Next question from Clive. Running, keeping your heart rate at 140 beats per minute, I've heard is key for doing long distance. True or false? If you're going to reduce it down to one word, false. Good luck trying to keep your heart rate at 140 if you're going up a really fucking steep hill. And more often than not, there's steep hills on endurance courses. That being said, the conceptual ideology is accurate in that we're aspiring to keep ourselves in zone 2 and zone 3 as much as is practicable. But understand there are going to be times when fatigue starts to accrue or there's this really aggressive ascents that you are probably going to go into zone 4 and zone 5. That can't be helped, but the goal is to get back to zone 2 and zone 3 as effectively as possible. And again, why we can't reduce that down to a specific number is zone 2 and zone 3 is going to be different for every single individual. Conceptually accurate, actual specifics, false. What do you eat before a big run? Great question, one that I get asked very frequently. For me, I tend to eat around about 90 minutes before, and we're looking ideally for about 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight. And then I'll normally get in around about 0.4 grams of protein per kilos of body weight. Very minimal fat, because fat tends to slow gastric emptying, so you tend to feel like you've got a bit of a heavy stomach. And that recipe has worked enormously well for me. How you want to facilitate that is entirely up to you. And I would say run the experiment. Things that are high in fiber, so for me, like an oat, like a porridge and stuff like that, will just sit in my stomach for the next fucking 3 days. It doesn't feel good. Cream of rice is what I typically tend to favor. I hope that helps. Top tips for injury prevention, please. So, strength and conditioning plays a large factor in injury proofing, quote unquote, somebody, but it would be arrogant for us to suggest that we can prevent all injuries. Now, it also depends on what it is that you aspire to attain or participate in. If you're a contact athlete, whether you're like a fighter or you play rugby / American football or something like that, you are going to be at a higher inclination for injury owing to collision, owing to the nature of the sport. And all that we can really do there is hypertrophy your connective tissues and actually hypertrophy you as a human, which is going to make you more robust in the collision space. If you're just like a general athlete who wants to be proficient and have great movement fidelity and just be fit and well, your incidence of injury should be negligible to nil, if nil's ever accessible, because your strength and conditioning should be written in a way that factors in intensity based on your current movement capacity. The volume should be appropriate to what you're currently capable of and should be accumulating over time. So yeah, I wouldn't look to see a lot of injury in that. It's simply looking at making sure there's no volatilities and that every base is being covered in your strength and conditioning, and that you're not, doing silly things like doing 20 sets on a chest day, for an example. So, any books you would recommend for business? What I'd say to that is most people don't have business problems; they have personal problems in terms of they're making decisions around finance, around growth, around leaning into challenge, and that titrate down to everything about marketing efforts, about how you're selling, what it is that you're selling, how you're delivering on that, so on and so forth. All of that tends to come from our inherent belief systems about ourselves, what it is we're capable of. So most people, maybe yourself included, I don't know, would be best investing in doing work on themselves, and as a result we'll see they have a higher inclination for risk, they're better equipped and more capable of operating in uncertainty, so on and so forth, which means as a result their business improves. If you then, after doing that, decide you still want to read books about business, the only one I could truly hand on heart recommend is The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, which is fantastic. Can frequent running negatively affect one's testosterone levels, and how to prevent that? I don't think that I've seen any data that would suggest that it does. I think if you're really smashing the arse out of it and you're inducing fatigue, then fatigue would be the thing that may suppress one's testosterone secretions. But I haven't necessarily seen any evidence that would support that. Too much of anything will negatively impact you. You've got to look at it through an evolutionary setting and through a biological lens. And if you're doing things that are requiring so much diversion of energy that your body is not really concerned with procreation, then it will mitigate sexual hormone production. But I'm not necessarily familiar with any research of that. It's certainly not something that I've noticed while I've been training. So I'm afraid I'm ill-equipped to answer that. What are your thoughts on personality tests? I mean, I'm not sure the standard of personality test that you're really referring to. If it's one that you found on Google or on like Instagram or Facebook, good possible. It's probably not accurate. If it's one of those ones that asks you, what kind of garden vegetable are you? Again, probably not the most accurate. If you're looking then into like kind of the middle tier where we're looking at Myers-Briggs tests, and 16 personality tests and so on and so forth, then I believe there is definite gravitas behind those. They come from a plethora of research in psychology and sociology, so there is a lot of weighting behind those. And then if you want to get into the real niche specifics and start looking at tests like the MTQ-48, when we're looking to test mental resilience and toughness and so on and so forth, I do believe there's an enormous weighting behind those. What are the best shoes for trail running? That does ultimately come down to what kind of trail. Like if you live in an area like Colorado, for example, where you're largely going to be on hard rock and there's not going to be a ton of mud or ice or anything like that, then you would be totally lost if you use like a Solomon like speed cross, which is what a lot of people here use in the UK because we're running on like boggy, shitty, grassy mud. So it depends on the terrain. The brand that I tend to defer to is Hoka. I've had enormous success with those. I use the Challenger ATR7 now, and they are basically sold as a door to trail. So if it's the extreme of trail, they wouldn't perform very well. Again, if it's like really like slippery, shitty mud, that's the most challenging terrain for most trainers. But like from hard rock through to relative degrees of instability, even the episode we did where we were on Snowdon in the snow, I was using them then and they performed really well. So that's what I can vouch for. A statement here that I would love to hear my thoughts on building mental toughness. I don't really know what I can do to give lip service to this in a very, very short video, but essentially the entire Hard to Kill Instagram, podcast, and YouTube presence is about building mental toughness. So all I can really do is signpost you to that, which I appreciate is a little bit laissez-faire, but that will give you infinitely more scope to think about how I perceive mental toughness and how I perceive we can optimally develop that in an individual than what I could say in one 30-second YouTube script. So the question here is quite a good question, quite a thought-provoking question. We all have a dark place we go to endure the pain of a session. What's yours? Well, the first thing I'll say is there's a large assumption there that we all go to a dark place. The second is not many sessions should be sending you to a dark enough location that you need to draw on some kind of inner pain and inner trauma. Now, far be it from me to decipher or determine that as actuality or that as a fact. It's simply what I'm taking away from my perceptions of this message. Regular training sessions should not be so intense that we're having to go into deep, dark corners of our psyche to get through them. That being said, when I do hard things, whether that's long runs or really fast efforts or, like particularly sickening conditioning sessions, I inherently find myself using mental skills that in later life I've found out to be actually well-studied, well-documented skills. For example, segmenting. Segmenting is something that I've used for a long time before I even knew segmenting was a thing. Right back to when I was a youngster playing like rugby and doing like hard fitness sessions there, I would always break things down. So I was always focused far more, and this is true to this day, I was always focused far more on breaking it down into small chunks that make it seem achievable. And when I'm really fucking hurting and when I'm really hanging out and I'm in pain and I'm injured, I just reduce how small that segment is. So like recently, this weekend has gone 20 miler with load, feet were hurting, knees were hurting, low back was hurting, shoulders were hurting. I just break it down and the watch goes off and it's another mile completed. So I have my chew and I'll get happy there. So let's get to the next chew. And then knowing that you can just break it down and focus on that bit by that bit by that bit by that bit. That's always what I've instinctively done. And then I've added to that over the years with skills like equanimity that have meant that I've never really been the person that has to visit a pain of trying to prove people wrong or anything like that, because I've got a really quite challenging backstory. If you look at the levels of rejection and failure I was opened up to as a very, very young man, but I've never really drawn on that. I've never really been like, fuck you, I'll prove you wrong, because that energy is really quite exhaustive. And if all you've got in that moment is an inherent belief that you're not good enough and you're doing it for somebody else's, then that motivation can actually be taken away from you. Because we see this from time to time in the program. Individuals are successful using that level of dark energy until they get to the point where they realize no one cares, they've already proved the point, so on and so forth, and then their motivation is gone. Poof, it's just fucking vanished into thin air. So I've always been much more centered, and this is genuinely not me constructing it, pretending I'm fucking mega and I'm different, I'm special. A great many people watching this will say the exact same. I've always just instinctively, intuitively used segmenting and then, found ways to be my own friend in that environment rather than just telling myself I'm not good enough. So it might not answer the question as you hoped, but that's typically what I do. So that is that done. So that's it for now. We only picked kind of however many that was. I think it was roughly 20. There was about 70 questions there, and I would love to have gone through them all. But owing to the fact I really aspire to deliver with a degree of, I guess, usefulness, to actually give you something you can go away with and think on or work through or immediately like implement, then I can't get through them all at once. So if I didn't answer your question, I'm enormously apologetic. I would love to. So that being said, moving forwards, if you enjoyed it, if you'd like to see your questions answered, if you'd like to hear more of this kind of stuff, then please let us know in the comments. Of like, I'd love to do another Q&A, and we can maybe look at doing them on a monthly cadence, for an example. But yeah, sincerely to anyone who didn't get their question answered, I would have loved to. We just literally took the 20 off the top and answered those in as much detail as appropriate and possible in the time that we have. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you're able to glean something useful from them to think on, to journal with, to utilize. And again, if that was the case, please let us know down below. I know I'd be massively appreciative of it. Harry would be appreciative of it as well. And we'll look forward to seeing your comments and feedback. So as you might be starting to think at this point, you've not actually seen much in the way of running for the past 2, maybe even 3 episodes, I forget. The reality is it's kind of by design because it's fucking boring. Like, what are you really going to gain from watching me run up and down a street or across a muddy field or any of that sort of shit? Of course, we aspire to show you the exciting stuff and the real monumental milestones that we're achieving, that we're stopping by on the pursuit of this goal. But ultimately, the reality of this situation is doing things of this magnitude is quite boring. And I hope that I'm effectively shining light on that and I'm really communicating it, because it can seem really exciting to sign up to events like this, but you have to really arm yourself and really prepare yourself for the reality that it is relatively boring. Now, this might not be particularly clickbaity, it's not sexualized, it's not glamorized in any way, shape or form. I really am trying to be honest with you. I really am trying to show you behind the scenes that it's not waking up at 5 a.m, jumping in a cold pool and then running 20 miles. It's just not the reality of it. The entire reality of it is finding ways, regulating yourself and dealing with your emotions that allow you to consistently do the right things day in, day out, to regulate your emotions, to guard yourself from injury, to nourish yourself appropriately so that you may go on to continue to just run the steady 5, 6, 7 miles every day, the long runs at a weekend, to continue operating at work or in your business. And that's really what I'm trying to communicate. And I hope that it's been informative. I hope that it's been inspirational, that you don't have to be anything special. You don't have to be a superhuman or an elite advanced individual. All you have to do is have something that is important to you and that you truly believe that you aspire to do, and that you maybe have a little bit of anxiety about doing, but that is what excites you and ignites you to go ahead and do it, knowing that you don't need to have anything special about you or in your life. You simply have to have the tenacity, the defiance, and the right people around you to continue turning up and doing those small things day in, day out. So I know there's not been a great deal of running, but it's because we've made a deliberate decision to focus more on the reality of the situation. And I hope that's been well received. So from us, that's wrapped up another episode, one that I've enormously enjoyed shooting. I hope that you've enjoyed watching it. As I said, any questions, comments, we'd love to hear them or see them in the section down below. But otherwise, really looking forward to the next episode. We've got something cool coming up then. But speak soon.